Good morning, everyone. It is about 9:02. We're going to call this meeting to order. And we would like to start with Director Sonny. Would you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amanda, roll call, please.
Director Sonny?
Here.
Director Level? Here. Director Sabo?
Here.
Director Miller?
Here.
Chair Crucio?
Here. Thank you. Do any of the board members have any communications or announcements they'd like to make at this time?
I do.
Go ahead, Rich. Go ahead, Rich.
I can't see my lips.
No,
Yeah, just an observation. I watched the LAFCO proceedings on the 6th of December, and obviously that was a rather significant meeting. I watched Director Level give her presentation or her comments regarding the proposals regarding water. And I just want to make this observation because after that meeting, both the Monterey County Weekly and the Herald then reported about that meeting and then reported what they believed Director Level was saying in the meeting, which I listened to what she said and it wasn't true. And the Weekly indicated that Marianne Level represented the Monterey Airport Special District and that she could not support the motion because there were too many questions. She did say there were too many questions, but she didn't say that she was representing the district. And then also the Herald then indicated that Commissioner Marianne Level, who represents the Monterey Regional Airport District, indicated that the airport district was going to lose revenue from this proposal. The point being is I think we need to be sensitive to what newspapers or the media actually says about us and correct it if necessary, because none of us as individual directors have the ability to represent the district unless we've talked about it and we've established this is a position the district wants to take. So there's no call on direct level. It was just an observation that I think we need to be conscious of what the media actually says about what we said or what we are doing in our other lives. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you, Director. Any member of the public like to make an announcement? Seeing none. Let's move on to the consent agenda. All items in the consent agenda are in your packets. At this time, I would like to call for a motion to approve consent. Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Roll call, Amanda?
Director Sonny?
Yes.
Director Level?
Yes.
Director Sabo?
Yes.
Director Miller?
Yes.
Chair Crucio?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, quick question.
Yes.
I may have missed it. Did you have any public comment on non-agenda items? I apologize. It went fast for my slow brain this morning.
You have a really slow brain. Very good, thank you. We're going to move on to the regular agenda at this point, and Executive Director, would you tee it up, please?
I certainly will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will introduce to you Sarah Hollenbeck. Sarah is one of the principals at PFM. PFM has been working with us on 2 projects, independent of each other, but will merge. First project, you recall the firm from the initial look at the plan of finance for the terminal building for the safety enhancement program. The second project is to help us sort through the best alternative source regarding our EAL. Sarah and her team, some of whom are on Zoom, will walk you through the analysis that they've done. We're not asking for decisions at this point. We'll be clear as we go through the presentation why we're not asking for that. But as we start to merge this effort and the plan of finance for the program, you'll see that it makes sense to have work together if you choose to move forward with the program. So Sarah will walk you through, and her team will walk you through the presentation and be available for questions.
So before we start, I have a question, and I'm asking both our presenter and you. Would it be best for, it's a pretty comprehensive presentation we see here. Would it be best that we allow our directors to ask questions as we move along?
I think that's the board's pleasure. I think experience with these kinds of presentations, some of the questions that you ask during the presentation are probably answered later in the presentation. But it's certainly
All right.
the board's
So I'm going to
pleasure.
leave it up to our directors. If you know, if we can hold off until we're finished with the presentation, that would be great. But if we see something pop up that you feel should be addressed, that's the way we're going to do it. Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure I understand, Mr. John. If we don't understand something that they're talking about, or clarification, is it okay to say, I need a clarification on that? During the presentation? Sure. Is that what you said?
Well, roughly, yeah, that's fine. Let's just. Okay,
All right. Ready, Mr. Chairman?
go ahead.
Sarah Holloway.
Sarah, you don't need to wait on me.
Okay,
I'm good.
okay.
Thank you. I didn't realize.
Oh, no. You're fine. I'm just gonna make a teeny more space here. Okay, so we go back to prior presentation. So good morning. Thank you all. Again, Sarah Hollenbeck with PFM. It's a pleasure to be here before you this morning and see a couple of familiar faces that we had spoken with the Finance Committee. So my two colleagues, Jaime Trejo and Alec Neal, are also here this morning by Zoom, and hopefully Jaime and Alec will accept the request to promote yourself or to be promoted to panelists in case we need to have you answer questions. But we're going to walk through a presentation as was described. We did, and we'll just move to the first slide here. Let's see. To advance the slides, oh yeah, okay. It's taking a moment. So as was discussed in the introduction, we have had initial discussions with the Budget and Finance Committee back in October. The context for all of this is really the backdrop is that many agencies around the state are dealing with rising costs of pension, funding their pension systems, in particular pension plans, I should say, and in particular their unfunded liability component of that. We began this process back in August or September using data from CalPERS from the 2020 actuarial valuation. We brought an initial presentation and discussion, mostly focusing rather on pension obligation bonds, and to that discussion in October with the Budget and Finance Committee. As is noted on the slide, the committee suggested that we take another look at some additional strategies that focus less on the issuance of bonds and more on the use of the cash on hand and on a current and ongoing basis
to make additional discretionary payments to CalPERS rather than relying on debt financing. And so what you'll see here today is primarily the analysis of those alternative scenarios. However, I'm happy to kind of back up and talk a little bit more about what pension obligation bonds are and how they work in the context of the scenarios that are included in today's presentation that do contemplate the use of some POBs or pension obligation bonds to some degree as one of the tools to address this liability. Yes.
I'm just having a little trouble because of the last, and I'm old and I got my hearing aids in, but you said the purpose of today's presentation is to examine the alternatives of what? I didn't hear that.
Oh, sure. I don't know if the preference is to keep the mask.
Actually, I believe the rule is when speaking, you can remove your mask.
Okay. Okay, I'm happy to do that if you all are
Yeah,
happy
that's
to
fine.
have it, if it would be less muffled and a little easier to hear,
We are.
a little easier
We're
to
all
breathe as
vaccinated.
well. I am also vaccinated and boosted, so
Okay, so I just didn't hear the last part of alternatives as the purpose of today's.
absolutely, yeah. So what we'll be focusing on primarily in this presentation is the scenarios that we prepared in response to the request from the Budget and Finance Committee at the October meeting that focuses primarily on different strategies other than the issuance of pension obligation bonds to address the unfunded liability. So the first meeting, we really were looking at how might you use pension obligation bonds to address the unfunded liability that you have and different structures of debt that you might use. The feedback was, let's not focus so much on debt issuance, but what other tools we have in our toolbox to pay down this liability that's costing, quite a bit of money, as PERS has reduced their discount rate from 7 to 6.8%, but nonetheless, it's still accruing at that 6.8% rate every year that it's not funded. Does that help?
It explains what you're doing today. I just needed to hear it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Oops. So, sorry. I think this is a tiny bit of a delay here, so I advanced the slide. I think I might have hit it twice, and I don't know. Okay, yes. It takes a minute for it to.
It's actually, I'm controlling it over.
Ah, that's why nothing's happening when I click that button. Okay, I'll just say, could we go to the next slide then? Could we go to the next slide? Thank you. So this is a summary of the additional structuring alternatives that we have looked at since the October Budget and Finance Committee meeting. And as I mentioned, these alternatives that we're really focusing on today concentrate on the use of what are called additional discretionary payments to CalPERS. So those are payments that the district would make at your own option each year from funds that you have on hand, or as I said, on an ongoing basis, just an additional contribution above and beyond the required amount that CalPERS tells you that you have to send to them each year to amortize the unfunded liability. So we've looked at a few strategies. The first set of strategies, scenarios kind of 1A and 1B, we'll call them, use a one-time sort of large upfront additional contribution or additional discretionary payment from a portion of the district's CARES Act money, and then an ongoing contribution or additional discretionary payment, ADP, above and beyond the required amount for a number of years thereafter. And we've looked at a couple of different levels of those additional discretionary payments going forward that you could use. The second set of strategies, scenarios 2A and 2B, contemplate, again, that upfront large sort of initial additional discretionary payment to get a head start on reducing that unfunded liability. And then in the second set of scenarios, this is contemplating the use of pension obligation bonds to fund the remaining UAL balance. The third set of scenarios just looks at level annual discretionary payments over a period of time and no upfront contribution. And then finally, scenario 4 really just ties back to the previous conversation we had with the Budget Finance Committee in October, which looks at the use of pension obligation bonds themselves alone as a means of addressing or eliminating the unfunded liability. So if we could go to the next slide. Is there anyone to pause? Are we okay on what we're talking about? So an additional discretionary payment, as I said, is just a payment you would make above and beyond the required amount that CalPERS kind of bills you for as the component you need to pay to reduce or amortize the unfunded portion of your liability. This has nothing to do with your normal cost. So the pension, the normal cost is something you're going to continue to pay as required by CalPERS each and every year. This is just dealing with the unfunded actuarial liability. So the difference between the assets you have in the plan and the value of the benefits you owe over time. So scenario 1, as I said, the assumption for both scenarios 1A and 1B is that there would be a one-time $4 million additional discretionary payment this current fiscal year from the CARES Act, a portion of the CARES Act money that you have available. And that would be applied to all of your pension plans on a pro rata basis. The plans that we would apply it to are not the PEPRA plans. Those are very small. We do address them in the context of this analysis, but the assumption is that that one-time payment would be made to the classic plans. And then thereafter, the assumption in scenario 1A is that even though the one-time additional discretionary payment would allow you to reduce the required ongoing payment for your unfunded liability, if you were to continue to budget those payments at the level you've budgeted this current fiscal year, rather than reducing that contribution, that difference would be an ongoing additional discretionary payment that would allow you to accelerate the retirement of that obligation. Scenario 1B is very similar to that. The only difference here is that in addition to maintaining the budgeted level of UAL contributions after that additional discretionary payment, we assume also that you continue to budget the amount that you've been paying in the 2012 pension obligation bond debt service, and that final payment is this year. We assume you continue to budget that also to accelerate the retirement of the unfunded liability.
And that's a little over 400,000.
Correct. Yes.
Could you explain in both scenario 1A and 1B what that pro rata basis means?
Oh, yeah. So we take the $4 million. So I think the total liability, we've rolled in to this analysis the most recent information from CalPERS. So back when we started this analysis in the late summer, we only had the fiscal 2020 CalPERS actuarial report. They have now provided updated analysis to take into account their 2021 projected actuarial liabilities. As you may be aware, CalPERS works on a fairly long lag. So you received your report in July of 2021, which was for the fiscal year that ended in June of 2020. But they have models that they've provided. And so we now are looking at the approximately $8 million overall unfunded liability that the district has, which is separated out into the fire plan, the police plan, and the miscellaneous plan. And each of those has a different total unfunded liability. And all we were trying to say here is that while the total liability is $8 million-ish, rounding, we take that 4 million and we just allocate it proportionally, based on the percentage of the total UAL that that plan represents.
I understand what you said.
Great. So moving to, does anyone else have questions on just what these scenarios are assuming or what they're based on? Okay, so we can move to the next slide. Here, what we've assumed is, as I mentioned, that the district would make, again, that same $4 million additional discretionary payment of ADP in this current fiscal year. In this first scenario, we've assumed it's applied to the fire plan only. And as you can see in the parenthetical, the projected unfunded liability of the fire plan for this fiscal year based on the latest models provided by CalPERS is just a shade over $4 million. So that had a sort of a neat tie-in to the $4 million amount that we're assuming. And then the remainder of the UAL in these two scenarios, 2A and 2B, we assume that the district issues pension obligation bonds to pay off the rest of it. Scenario 2B is essentially the same as 2A, except for the fact that instead of applying that first contribution only to the fire plan, it is applied pro rata across all of the plans. And because the plans have different components to their UAL, they have a different current amortization schedule. Some of them have bases, is what they're called. They're sort of the slices of the UAL that make up the total. So each year you either have a negative or a positive base. So either CalPERS, for example, outperforms their investment return projection, and that reduces your liability. So you have what's called a negative base, or perhaps they fail to meet their investment return target, or some other actuarial change, assumption is changed. They assume that the retirees live longer, and so there's a greater benefit projected to be needing to be paid. So that might create a positive base, which means your UAL goes up. So because those underlying characteristics of each plan are different, depending on where you apply the money that we assume you apply to reduce the UAL, produces a different result. Slightly different, but different nonetheless. So that's the summary of what scenarios 2A and 2B are assuming. Jaime had, I think, something to say. He's raised his hand. So Jaime, what would you like to chime in with? Oh, yes.
On all your scenarios, your alternatives, you mentioned one time $4 million
Yes.
ADP. How did you
Why
arrive at $4 million? Where did that come from? Where does that come from?
Great question. Yes, let's dig into that for a moment. And I would be happy to defer to Mike on that.
You want to have a raise his hand?
Yeah, let's answer this question, okay. and then we can see what Jaime wanted to contribute as well.
Right now, in the original CARES Act funding, we have about $8.3 million remaining. We have recovered quite well financially. See next month, we'll be asking to consider a budget. So initially, the discussion, and it was just discussion, was that we would reserve those funds for some acquisition along Highway 68. As we got into this, it seemed to make more sense, and it was discussed at length at the Finance Committee, that perhaps we would serve ourselves better by using some of that CARES Act money to pay down this debt. And that's part of this analysis. So it would be CARES Act dollars that we could use to pay down our obligations. That's allowed in the CARES Act itself. So the $4 million is about half of that. The balance we would reserve for other uses or could later be put onto this as well if that was the choice. But we reserve that in our strategy to affect a lease buyout that we're going to have to undertake at some point in the near future here. And if that does not move forward, then we've got $4 million that we can, or additional $1 million that we can purchase as well.
Okay, just so I understand, the $4 million was an arbitrary selection, like half, and then.
Pretty, yeah.
And it's coming out of CARES money, which has an expiration date on it. Is that right?
We've got about 2.5, almost 3 years left to spend that money.
Okay, and then this is not coming out of district tax.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Great. I think if I may, if you're there.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one quick comment. The POBs will be used to fund the remaining UL of the classic and pepper plants. And just to note, the pepper plants, there are two of them, one for the miscellaneous, one for the fire. With the projections from 2021, the CalPERS has provided to us, the miscellaneous plan will be fully funded. And the UAL for the pepper fire plan will be about $35,000. So the majority of the POBs would be issued for the classic plants.
Right, thank you. Okay, so let's move on then to the next slide. Great. So in this set of scenarios, 3A and 3B, we have not assumed that upfront contribution from the CARES Act money or elsewhere. These scenarios contemplate simply an analysis of how much the district would need to pay in equal annual additional discretionary payments over a period of either 10 or 15 years to reach 100% funding at the end of that period. So rather than, as was just described, taking a portion of funds on hand or funds available and making kind of a down payment on or a jump start to reducing this liability. In these two scenarios, we don't do that. We just say if you were to, set an amount you were going to contribute each year above and beyond what is required, and make that contribution each year over 10 or 15 years, how much would it need to be such that at the end of that period, this current UAL has been extinguished or is gone. And so those payments are assumed to be made once a year and are applied to the portions of the liability that extend for the longest period of time. As I was just describing a moment ago, as you may be aware, the UAL is made up of bases, and some of them have an amortization period of something 25 years or more, and some of them in the 15, 13, 12-year kind of range. So we just have made the assumption for the purpose of this analysis that those payments would be applied each year to the longest remaining bases, because that then eliminates that 6.8% accrual factor, if you will, for the longest period of time. It generates the greatest savings. And we assume that the first of those payments is made in fiscal 23. And then finally, on the next slide, again, kind of to just tie this back to the original analysis that we had prepared and the discussion we had had, scenario 4 assumes that rather than making additional discretionary payments to CalPERS over time, the district would issue bonds to fund the full amount of the unfunded liability. That would happen, this current fiscal year, and that the target for that funding would be to achieve 100% to fully eliminate the UAL, and that the final maturity of those bonds would be 2042, which is the final UAL amortization. Well, I should say substantially the final UAL amortization. I think there's a small payment that extends out beyond that on the miscellaneous plan in the amount of something like $3,000. So we just cut it off at 2042. Didn't make sense to mirror that exactly and have the debt go out longer than 2042. And we've based this analysis on indications we received from several potential private placement lenders. As you probably are aware or recall, the financing that the district did in 2012, the POB financing that was done was on a private placement basis with this one single lender. And we have kind of canvassed that market to see what indications of interest rates they would provide. And so the analysis we've provided here is based on indications that we received, just as a starting place. So moving to the next slide. So that was really just to lay out for you what we've looked at. And now we're going to get into the results of that analysis. But before we move into this, and this is really probably what you're more interested in, is there anything that anyone has a question about before we get into, what did this all tell us when we did that analysis? Okay. So seeing none, we'll just jump in here. So as you can see on slide 8, all of the alternatives that we looked at are projected to produce savings versus the status quo of doing nothing and just continuing to pay the unfunded liability contribution requirements that are communicated to you by CalPERS each year. The range of the projected savings is from about $662,000 to just over $4 million. And the scenario that produces, the greatest savings is scenario 1B, where the payment of $4 million up front and then ongoing contributions at the level you're budgeting in this current fiscal year toward the CalPERS UAL payment plus what you've been paying in the debt in the POB debt service. So the largest ongoing annual payment, unsurprisingly, I suppose, produces the greatest projected savings because it eliminates the liability over the shortest period of time. As you can see, the second place finisher, if you will, is 1A, where you don't continue to budget at the level of the debt service on the 2012 POBs, but just simply hold constant at this year's UAL contribution and make those additional discretionary payments with the money that's the difference between what CalPERS requires you to pay and what you were budgeting this year after you've made that $4 million upfront payment. That also produces about $3.8 million of savings. Interestingly, the scenarios that contemplate the issuance of debt don't produce as great of savings, and the pension obligation sort of standalone structure is well below the analyses that produce or that contemplate additional payments. And simply, I think that's because if you're borrowing money, there's interest you have to pay on that. Whereas if you're using your own money, you didn't have to borrow it from anyone, even though you're doing it over time rather than all upfront, it does not carry that interest cost. Jaime, is there anything you wanted to add on this slide at all?
No, I think you covered it. Not bad.
Okay, great, thank you. So moving to the next slide. Oh, certainly.
I apologize for asking this question.
No.
Just clarification. When we talk about these like 1A, 1B, having the greatest savings here, we're actually putting, the district is putting money, letting go of money that we could be earning interest on or have alternative investments. Is that factored into the estimated savings? Because when you get all the way down to 4, obviously it's a fairly low interest payments.
Mhm.
But we're losing interest received up on 1A and 1B. You don't understand my question.
I understand your
And I
question.
just want to know how you calculate this.
Yeah, that's a great point and a subtlety that we hadn't focused on in the description of it. You're absolutely right that there is an opportunity cost to a certain degree of any cash that you have, that if you pay it to someone else rather than holding on to it, there's an opportunity cost to that. So what I think we did not assume an earnings rate, for example, on the $4 million in CARES Act funding that you would then be foregoing, in part because short-term interest rates like liquidity vehicles right now are not paying very much. I don't know if you all, I think you probably hold your monies in LAIF if you have excess cash, and I don't know, last I checked, it was at earning less than 50 basis points and probably well less than.
I think it's in the 30 basis point area. So the opportunity cost is nominal. And we're not losing much interest by using our funds.
Well, if I may, that's CARES Act money that we're not getting any interest on until
That's correct.
Yeah,
we can only use it for something.
Right.
So
Yeah, they don't hand it to you and then you're
so
investing.
we're not losing anything on that.
Yeah.
That money is
Right.
not in our account. It's not our money
Yeah.
until we find a use of it.
That's correct.
Yes, exactly. In terms of the other money, so if you had budgeted or funds that you didn't budget that drop down to fund balance, when your required payment would reduce after making an additional contribution, the $4 million contribution, if you didn't spend those to continue to whittle away at the UAL, they would presumably either be spent on something else or, to the point that was made in the question, could be held in your fund balance and earn something. Again, because the CARES Act money is not actually sitting in your account, we didn't worry about opportunity costs on that. And for these other budgetary excesses, if you will, we also didn't make an assumption about that in large measure because the reinvestment rates that you can get on the local agency investment fund with the state or otherwise are very low right now. So it's not built in, I guess, is the short
even
answer.
If you look at, if we got 2% on everything, the difference between that and 6.8 is pretty phenomenal. Which is why this thing keeps building.
Right. So moving on to the next slide. This is a slide that tries to capture kind of your cash outflow over the next 5 years associated with these various different strategies. So on the far left is the original schedule. So this represents the payments, the annual payments the district would make to CalPERS according to the CalPERS model. What you're projected to be required to pay toward the UAL if you don't do anything. So right now, that payment is expected to be about $1 million in the next fiscal year. I believe this current fiscal year it was about 930,000. So it's going to be approximately $1 million, as you can see, in fiscal 23, and then declining over time out through fiscal 27 to a shade under $800,000. If my glasses are clean enough and I can see that. And then what we've shown is just, again, kind of scenarios 1A and 1B and on down to 4, going across from left to right. And the annual amount that you would pay towards the UAL, again, this is only the UAL related component, including any, not including the $4 million, because you see the scale doesn't go up that high, but after the $4 million upfront payment in those scenarios where that's assumed, what would the payments be going forward? Jaime, do you want to walk us through this? Since I think this was a presentation format that you devised, and I think it's really helpful as a way of thinking about an important difference or illustrating important differences amongst these strategies.
Yeah, sure. One of the things we try to accomplish here is to show the payments under each scenario for the next 5 years. And we chose 5 years for several reasons. One, it gives us a good snapshot of the short term. It particularly allows us to think about what's going to happen with any potential debt issuances that the district might have coming up in the next couple of years. Right, so understanding that there might be potential debt issuance in fiscal year 24, 25 for the new terminal. So we kind of wanted to think about that when we devised these scenarios and how that might impact the future rating of the district. And what these show here, right, for example, 1A, we see that the payments to under this scenario are pretty level, about 920,000, then they drop off, and they'll continue to drop off after that. And in 1B, right, we have fairly high payments compared to what we're paying now for the UAL, at about 1.3. And you can almost see in fiscal year 26, 27, there's a dramatic drop off in the payments. So by making more payments up front, we will significantly reduce the time it takes to pay off the UAL. But here we paid off in 4 years as opposed to 20 plus years. And we contrast that with 2A and 2B, where we kind of keep the payments where they're at now. But with the pension obligation bonds and the level of debt service that we propose, or that's proposed, the cost to distinguish the UAL is fairly low at about $200,000. So there's about a $1 million swing cash flows between some of these scenarios, particularly 3A, 1B, and 2A, and 2B. And I think we wanted to show here is that while some of these scenarios, such as 1A, 1B, save the most amount of money, in the short term, they kind of cost the most, so to speak, because of the outflow of cash, versus 2A, 2B, which may not save as much money, but allow you to retain more cash in your account that can be used and applied to debt service, to any potential debt issuances in a couple of years.
And just to finish the thought then, so 3A, again, this is, as you can see in fiscal 22, 23, 3A is actually the scenario that would require payments above and beyond what you're paying currently, including the debt service you've been paying on the pension obligation bonds. So this is the scenario, just to remind you all, 3A is the scenario that answers the question, how much would we need to pay each year to amortize the obligation, the UAL, over 10 years without making a big upfront contribution. And so that's a more expensive prospect than the various others that do include kind of a down payment on that obligation in the form of that $4 million upfront payment. So
we'll show we'll show all the payments for all these plans versus the status quo. But in this page, we just kind of wanted to show the next 5 years for all the scenarios in one page.
So moving on to the next slide, then we get into the details of each one of these strategies and kind of a graphic representation as well as a numeric representation of what the payments would look like, what the savings look like, what the total amount of the payments look like, and then graphically how that compares to what you're paying in the status quo, where you make nothing beyond just what CalPERS is expected to require over time. I want to pause for a moment too and just say, as we've talked about when we've spoken with the committee in prior meetings, the UAL is a snapshot in time anytime you look at it. As I mentioned, each year, CalPERS has whatever experience they have with respect to investment performance and other factors. And so all we're able to do, so what the blue lines, I just want to say this affirmatively, the blue bars on the chart at the bottom and on all the pages where we say original schedule, is CalPERS's projection based on your current UAL today of what you will need to pay in the future. That is going to change, 100% certain to change in the future. So we have to measure it against something. So we're measuring it against a snapshot that we can make today based on the most recent information provided by CalPERS. Indeed, they had a meeting in mid-November and made a decision to reduce their discount rate from 7 to 6.8%. And so these numbers reflect that, most recent information we have from CalPERS. I just want to be clear that this picture is going to change in the future. But what we have to measure against is what we know of this picture today. Yes.
But again, apologies for interrupting the question, but just so that I and all of us understand going forward what this CalPERS Excel model is telling us. This is based upon their 7% right now, or maybe go into 6.7.
This is based on 6.8, which they have decided to change.
Oh, they decided that.
Yes.
Okay, so given their track record in the past, where their investment performance slipped down as low as 0.68, does that factor in here at all? I'm having a little trouble understanding this graph from the standpoint of, I know what they're projecting is their target return, but if they don't, they go below that, those numbers can change rather dramatically, because they make, if I understand correctly, CalPERS makes an annual decision as to what our contribution is going to be. Is that right?
That's correct.
Based on their investment performance.
Among other things, yes.
Okay.
So they send you a report each year. That's their actuarial valuation. And that report takes into account investment performance and other things that may or may not have met what their actuarial assumptions are. So each year they send you an update as to what your UAL is for each plan. You receive a report, what the new UAL is, or what the current UAL is, and then what your payment schedule is projected to be. But as you say, it is certainly the case that next July, when you receive your report for the fiscal year ending 2021, the picture will likely have changed, and they can change actuarial assumptions along the way. They smooth in these change, when they have an over or underperformance, it doesn't all sort of hit the bottom line, if you will, in 1 year. They do smooth it in over time, but nonetheless, it does have an impact. So that was why I wanted to say just, very clearly, all we have today is a snapshot of what the future will look like. If CalPERS, for example, continues to reduce their discount rate, they've come down from, I think they were in the 8s somewhere, years and years ago, and they've slowly but surely been ratcheting that down because, they recognize that they're not able to attain, a 7.5 or 7.25, don't project to be able to attain that return with an investment portfolio that they believe has the appropriate level of risk. So that was one of the conversations that they were having throughout the fall as they were going through their asset liability management program process that they do every 4 years is, do we go back up to 7 or do we stay at 7? Do we come down? Do we come down to 6.8? Do we come down to 6.5? And trying to balance, what kind of a portfolio would we need to invest in to achieve a 7.25% expected return or a 7% expected return? What are the instruments out there? What are our capital markets assumptions telling us we can earn in the types of investments we have in our portfolio? And what discount rate is achievable with a level of volatility that our employer members can tolerate? And so they came to a 6.8% decision. They will revisit that every 4 years according to their own policy. And so it may change in the future, but to your specific point, they may or may not hit that exact number. I was just pulling up the range of returns they have achieved over the last 30 years, and the range is quite wide. The low point was a negative 24% return in 2009, and the high point was positive 21.7% in 2011, and in 2020 it was 21.3. But there have been, years of negatives and positives all along the way. They very rarely ever even get close to hitting their actual target. It bounces around up and down, and sometimes hovers around that number, but it does change.
Okay, my question was directed at your slide,
Mhm.
making sure that I understood, and that bar graph is based upon that 6.8.
Yes,
For the duration.
correct.
Okay, understanding that it can change, and investment performance can change, their assumptions can change, but our savings is based on this chart are based on 6.8.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
And then holding it constant at 6.8.
Yes.
They being CalPERS.
Yeah, the analysis is based on them sticking with the 6.8 discount rate, and B, hitting that number every year.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as you can see, this is scenario 1A, where there's a $4 million ADP, and then you budget at the current, the fiscal 21-22 level that you were, the required payment to PERS to amortize the unfunded liability. If you continue to budget at that level, about $920,000 towards the UAL. The projected payments versus the status quo with all the assumptions we just talked about generates savings of about $3.8 million. So it reduces the total expected payments over the period from about 13.2 to about 9.4. And as you can see, the first bar, so the yellow bars on the graph are the payments you would make in the strategy, and the blue bars are the expected payments according to the current PERS model. So you can see that large $4 million payment is incorporated into fiscal 21-22. And then what's interesting, I think, to see here is that, with payments just above, at or above, slightly above, out in 26, what you would otherwise be expecting to budget according to, the status quo scenario, you fully amortize this liability in fiscal 28. So you're done. Again, done with the UAL that you have now. Today, yes. Moving to the next slide. So this is a very similar picture, just a little bit more so. So this is, again, the scenario in which you continue to budget not only your current year UAL contribution required by CalPERS, even though your required contribution would have gone down if you made that $4 million ADP. So you continue to budget the level you're budgeting, kind of total payments towards the UAL. So if you consider the payment you're making to CalPERS and the POB debt service as a payment towards the UAL, if you continue to allocate that much of your budgetary resources to addressing the current UAL, you would have extinguished the liability in this projection, again, based on all the caveats we've talked about, in fiscal 26. And that would generate, approximately $4 million of savings. Shortening, the horizon quite considerably. Moving to the next slide, unless anybody has anything on this one. Jaime, do you want to talk about these POB scenario slides?
Yeah, I can talk about these. In the next two slides, we'll talk about the two scenarios where we made the $4 million additional discretionary payment this fiscal year, and then bond for the remaining UAL. In the first scenario here, we applied the $4 million to just the fire plan. The fire plan is the biggest of your three classic plans and biggest of your five plans. As we mentioned earlier, the UAL this year slightly greater than $4.1 million. And we structured the bonds so that the first 2-year payments are roughly equal to what you're paying now. So there aren't any savings or cash flow savings in the first 2 years. But after that is when we get the cash flow savings. We drop down the debt service from about 900,000 to a little bit over 200,000. And you can see on the chart to the right, the far right column, those are the estimated cash flow savings. And the estimated cash flow savings for about the next 10 years are around the $500,000 range. And the purpose here and the reason why we drop down the debt service in fiscal year 25 is because that's when, you know, there might be a debt issuance for the new terminal. So we want to dovetail the two issuances so that one, there's appropriate cash flow, and two, we have strong credit rating metrics. And we'll talk a little bit about what those metrics are later on. But reducing the debt service in 25 through 2042 would help out the credit rating here. Right, so payments first 2 years are roughly the same as what you're paying now or projected to pay now, and then after that we drop it down to about 200,000. The next slide. Here we make a $4 million discretionary payment to all the classic plans, police, fire, and miscellaneous, and we're applying that $4 million to the bases with the longest amortization periods. So that's why here this one cuts off in 2039, because that's once you make the $4 million payments and then you see the new schedule and the complex models, the furthest it extends out to 2039. So we don't want to have debt service payments that extend beyond the projected UAL schedule after you make the $4 million additional discretionary payment. But the same concept here, first 2 years of debt service, mimic what you're paying now, and then we drop it down to about $200,000 to produce cash flow savings for the next 13, 14 years. And as I mentioned earlier, we also include the pepper plans in the in what's being bonded, and those are only about $35,000. So it's a very small amount.
Thanks, Honey. We have a question in the room.
What is, again, I didn't hear it clearly. What is an all-in TIC at 4.71? What does that mean?
In sort of plain language, that's the estimated borrowing cost. It stands for all-in true interest cost, which is a debt metric, a specific kind of mathematical computation in municipal finance. But what it represents is essentially the sort of effective borrowing rate.
So that's the cost of borrowing?
Yes, taking into account the
4.7
costs, the transaction costs associated with the borrowing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I should note here that the interest rates we're using have a buffer, right? I think of a 25 or 50 basis point buffer in interest rates we're using just to be conservative. But if kind of the market holds up, these savings would be a little bit greater than what we're showing here, and the TIC would go down.
So just to be clear, the interest rate would be 3.5, but you've got points and fees and closing costs and all of that, and that's what takes it to 4.71.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Want everybody, it's not like you are thinking that it's going to be a 4.71% interest rate. I want to be.
Yeah, the indication of the indicative interest rate with the buffer, as Jaime described, is 3.58, and then, as you say, there are costs of effecting the transaction that get taken into account in computing that all-in figure.
And these are fixed rates?
Yes. Yes.
If fixed rates with the 10-year cost, in 10 years, you'd have the option to refund the bonds.
All right. Shall we move on to the next slide then? Jaime, do you want to talk about this one?
Yep, I'll talk about it. In the next two scenarios, 3A, 3B, we look at what would it take in terms of additional discretionary payments to pay down the UAL in either 10 years or 15 years. So in this scenario in 3A, the goal here is to pay down the UAL within 10 years. So what would our annual discretionary payment have to be in order for us to pay down UAL in 10 years? And so you'd have to make a payment of $422,000 and some change above and beyond what you're making now to essentially pay down your UL in 10 years. You can see here that the bars are pretty high in fiscal years 22, 23, 24, 25, and they start to go down. And one reason why we get pretty close, the gray bars and the blue bars at the end is because when you make an additional discretionary payment into CalPERS, it reduces your liability in the future. But the scenario here is every year you're making an additional discretionary payment. I think we talked about this. If there are years where the budget is tighter, you have other uses for the money, you don't have to make that payment, you're not committed to making it, it's a discretionary payment. So you'd have to make a payment of $422,000 and some change for the next 10 years to pay down the UL by 2032.
The next slide.
In 3B, here we looked at paying down 15 years, and this produces the least amount of savings for several reasons. One, I believe the police plan is less than 15 years, so there's no additional benefit to putting additional money into police plan because it's already less than 15 years. The fire plan is about 17 years, so it doesn't take a lot of money to bring it down from 17 to 16. And the miscellaneous plan actually goes out to 2061 or 62, but most of those payments are very small. For the last 20 years, the payments will be about $3,000. So again, it doesn't take a lot of money to get your payments and your UAL to under 15 years. So here you have to make an additional discretionary payment of about $96,000, $97,000 into CalPERS in an effort to reduce your payment period from roughly 2039, 2040 to 2037.
Yes, the question.
Okay, just to understand the graph, again, apologies, but
No, please, no. It's a great question.
all these bar graphs, the one previous, this one, with the blue bars and orange.
I know that one. I don't know what that is. Sorry.
They're all predicated on, what is this telling us is paying off the UAL.
Yes.
It doesn't speak to any, let's assume for a moment that CalPERS comes in with one of their 2% performance figures. We still have to be paying a CalPERS figure for their annual contribution if they don't meet their targets. Is that correct? What you're telling us here is how we reduce our current UAL.
That's right.
But if they can create another unfunded liability by missing their performance targets in the future, this graph is not showing us any contribution we might have to make in the future if they miss their funding or their return performance targets. Is that, you understand my question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely, that is absolutely correct.
So
we have
can
not
have bigger payments than this.
We have not assumed that, but you are correct. You could have bigger payments than this. This is a snapshot of your current existing unfunded liability using the tool that CalPERS provides to model the payments you will owe on that liability over time. And we did not, and they do not assume that they're going to miss their target. They assume they're going to hit the target. We know that they aren't going to hit the target every year, and we haven't made an assumption about what year and by how much they might miss it. But if they do, or when they do, there will be a new UAL component that's created, and then it will have a new payment schedule that's not shown here. Absolutely.
I just want to be clear, because once you leave we're looking at these charts all by ourselves. You know, so.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why it's hard to think about, you know, you're trying to repay something that's changing every year over time. It's a moving target. All we have is what we know today. And, you know, the reason we think it's important to try to, even though there's no certainty about the future, you know, as you think about, stepping back for a moment, as you think about potentially going forward, and I know there will be discussion in January about, you know, kind of the bigger picture of the district and the airport and what you want to do here. You're going to potentially be making some decisions about that. You know, what we're trying to think about is how, if you are to move forward with your development plans, how do you put yourselves in the best position, kind of broadly speaking, to proceed forward on that path, if that's the path you choose. And as Jaime has mentioned a couple of times, you know, to the extent that you're going forward with any type of a debt issuance to fund that plan, and speaking to rating agencies and investors, that you will have, you know, addressed what everybody talks about and asks about in the context of those kinds of conversations, which is, what are you doing about your pension liability? So that's sort of the backdrop. But we know that we can't, it's not fixed in time, and it will, unfortunately, an ever-changing thing, and, you know, it's something that needs, you know, constant attention, not just once kind of plans, you know, adopted.
And I just want to add, so this analysis is good as of June 30th, 2021, right? The numbers are going to change July 1st, 2021, or would have changed the next day.
So moving on to slide 16.
In slide 16 here, similar concept to the prior POB structures, except here we're not making an additional discretionary payment to CalPERS. We are bonding for an entire amount of the UAL. In similar structure, right, the first 2 years, we will mimic the payments, existing UAL payments to CalPERS. After that, we'll drop down to level debt service until 2038, and we'll step down the debt service for the last 4 years in an effort to minimize this savings at the tail end. Again, this is one of many structures we looked at. We don't have to have this savings at the tail end. It's just one structure that allows us to have level payments at an affordable level, slightly over, you know, $550,000 or underneath that amount. In terms of this savings at the end for POBs, that's a fairly common structure. I would say maybe half of the POBs have a structure that has some of this savings in a couple of years, just because the graphs for the UAL significantly steps down at the end. And the rating agencies have a neutral view on that. As long as you're not pushing a whole bunch of debt back, they're neutral on it.
All right. And then on to the next slide, we talk a little bit about kind of the rating agency criteria. And again, we wanted to talk about this because it relates back to what I was just saying about kind of the looking at this picture from a broader lens and thinking about, you know, why do you even care about this? Why do you want to do something about it? Well, one is, you know, 6.8% is a pretty high rate to be, you know, quote unquote, amortizing debt when there's other alternatives that out there that could make it less expensive. And why that matters, as I mentioned, is to the extent you're going to be, if you do choose to move ahead with the development plan and are going to be having conversations with rating analysts and you know, portfolio managers in the context of investor relations, this is something that they focus on quite a bit these days. So Jaime spent 4 years as a rating analyst at S&P before joining PFM, and I'm going to let him speak to kind of some of the key metrics and areas that the criteria by which rating airports are rated are evaluated.
Yeah, there are three key metrics here. One is coverage. So coverage means, what are your net revenues compared to your debt service payments, right? The greater your net revenues to your debt service payments, the stronger the coverage. Right? We want to be, ideally you'd have a strong coverage, not always possible, but that's, kind of where we want to be at for the ratings. We want to get a good interest rate. The second one is debt and liability assessment. Is debt to net revenues, so debt is a percent of net revenues. I don't think this one is as important as a metric because a lot of places have a lot of debt compared to the revenues. But it's, can you afford it? Do you have strong coverage? And lastly, your days cash. Liquidity is a big factor here for rating agencies. That they really care about your reserves, how much money you have in the bank, your access to cash, in case there's a disruption in your cash flows, as we've seen recently for many places with the COVID-19 pandemic. So days cash is a big factor for them, and your reserve levels are something they're really going to care about when looking at your credit.
Right. And so the reason we wanted to mention this, and indeed, it really ties back to the reason we're not making a recommendation today as to what the best or most appropriate advantageous strategy for you might be, is really that, if you were moving forward with the development plan and planning to be seeking ratings and going to the debt capital markets in the future, you might choose a different strategy than if you aren't. So you might be more willing to, extend yourself a little bit more in terms of what you're paying out annually to reduce this liability if you're not so concerned about preserving cash, to the point of, the last set of criteria on the slide. Conversely, if you do anticipate, being in that conversation with rating analysts and investors about, your rate, your credit worthiness, and one of the things they're going to look at is days cash on hand and unrestricted reserves, you might take a different tact in terms of, instead of, for example, one of the strategies that says, well, let's continue to budget at this higher level, and let's even continue to budget the amount we were paying towards the POB debt service on the 2012 bonds and really aggressively address this liability. If the alternative is, well, we don't do it quite as aggressively, but we have that cash in reserve, so we're satisfying, we're looking a little bit more positive or stronger on this last, kind of days cash metric, you might make a different choice. And so that's why we wanted to present you a whole variety of alternatives and the analysis associated with them. But we think the decision about what you might do really is needs to be taken in the context of the overall kind of future of the airport, which we understand you're going to be considering, in the coming months. So that's, I think, all we had for you. We know it's a lot. We appreciate your patience and all the great questions, and happy to answer any others that you may have. Or any.
There's another slide. It's just a timeline slide.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Lot to digest, obviously. And I'm sure that our directors have some questions while we have both of you here. And I would like to start with director level.
I don't have any questions. I just think from what you gave us in October and the depth that you went into for today's presentation, I really thank you. I think it's extremely thorough. I think it's easy to understand, and I think it gives us a good basis as we move into the first part of 2022 to determine what we're going to do as we work with MPAD and we work with our regulatory body and where we need to be for the future of this region and for its transportation needs. So thank you. I'm sure we'll be in deep conversations starting about February, but right now it's really given us a good basis. And I our presentation on Monday. I went over it again last night, and I don't think we missed anything with what we requested. So thank you.
Okay, Director Soni, anything?
Director Lawful and I were obviously in the finance committee for this report too, and appreciate you really answering our questions back then. I think as a board, one of the things that came up for me is just what is the opportunity cost if we do look at 2, 3, 4 million, up to 6 million or whatever dollars. Is there opportunity for us to actually have income in a different way coming in and looking at that? So I do think this is very important, and I know that previous boards have done such activities. And I think that's kind of where we were in October, that we wanted more information. And I find this presentation really valuable for that. But I think as a board, and I guess we'll be doing that in a year with some things, is just looking at what are the opportunity costs and what makes sense for us. So thank you very much, you guys. Great presentation again too. We appreciate the information, and knowledge is power. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Miller.
Thank you, both of you, for the presentation. I'd like to go over a few things that might be beneficial for the newer members of the board. So 10 years ago, we went with a pension obligation bond. Now, my recollection, because I was here when we did that, that was to cover the cost of going from one plan to another, if I'm not mistaken, from when we elevated from like a 2 at 50 safety plan to a 3 at 50 for police and fire. Is that correct? Is that what our prior pension obligation bond is being?
Just so you're aware, we did make the final payment this month. So,
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Extent. That was a side agreement. Side agreement published pretty close to what you just heard.
Okay, so it was mainly for elevating plan coverage.
Yeah, it was principally affecting the public safety, the law enforcement.
But and I do remember correctly, that was about $4 million, and it was going up at about 12%.
Correct.
And there was no way we would possibly get in front of it other than to put a bond on it and get a fixed rate and put it on a 10-year amortization and stop the payment. Because we would just get further and further. As we are.
Well, in full disclosure, I am a PERS safety annuitant. But don't take what I say that I have any self-serving interest here. But I do remember the good old days when PERS was super funded and employers were not paying anything. I think that was back in the 90s. And I guess we can always hope that we could get back to that scenario, although I doubt it. All this unfunded liability that we have right here is for classic employees, right? Not for the PEPRA.
For the most part, I think Jaime mentioned that the PEPRA component is something
It's like 35,000.
30.
Like 35,000.
Yeah.
Right.
So yes, substantially yes.
So when we talk classic, we're really talking the top tier versus the lower tier. Right now, we're a 2-tier retirement system.
Mhm.
And we have shed ourselves of all our police safety and fire safety. So we're only talking about people that have already retired, correct? Or will retire, that may have worked for us at one time.
We have very few classic employees at this point. The preponderance of what you see there is related to previous.
Well, we have no classic fire or police employees.
We have no fire, no police, or UAL at this point, other than what.
So we're pretty static. We're not, the likelihood of it getting much worse. In fact, as people die, it's only going to get better, right?
Not right now.
Well, I know. And I say this as a annuitant. That when we die, that obligation sort of disappears.
Pacific Grove checks the obits every day.
I know, and they hope.
Yeah, there are some assumptions made in the actuarial computations about that mortality aspect. Yes.
How do we compare with other agencies as far as the liability? I mean, is it manageable for us moving forward? And how many are actually doing something about it or just waiting?
Yeah,
And if
well,
go ahead.
most agencies we work with are trying to come up with a plan of some kind to deal with this, because to the extent that they have any participation in the capital markets, it is the question that everyone asks, and many folks actually have a liability that, rather than looking like what your curve, if we can go back to one of the slides that has.
Yes, this keeps going up and up and up, right?
Well, most of what we see, if we could go back to slide, at the very beginning. Keep going back. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think we have in this
Not that slide.
presentation.
Okay, sorry. But if, yeah. So most of the agencies we talk to actually have a much bigger problem in terms of managing this annually, because they're, I'll look at our old presentation, and this is based on the 2020. But while your liability, your projected payments to PERS prior to us receiving the 2021 information was gradually increasing between 22 and about 31. Most of the folks we talk to, it literally looks like this. Well, from your side, going like this. I mean, it may be doubling almost, or at least 1.5 times. So they're talking about, right now we have let's just pick a number, $20 million PERS cost, and in 10 years they expect it to be 35. So from that perspective, it's not as big of a problem as many other agencies have. However, it's still a significant liability that's costing, quite a bit of money, or it's a high rate, high discount rate that you're paying on the portion that is unfunded and continues to remain outstanding.
And I know there is a lot of focus and concern on it in the state. Is there any proposals at the state level to address this? Sometimes agencies that don't do anything and find themselves in a lot of trouble are rewarded.
Well, I think that's what PEPRA was, right? I mean, they adopted legislation that, the Public Employees Retirement Reform, whatever the PEPRA stands for. So they've changed that. You can't have, you can't go back to the days where you don't make a payment at all, even if they're super funded. You still have to pay something. They changed the tiers. I think most employers have taken a whole host of steps. Negotiating higher participation in the PERS payments by their employee groups in many cases. So I don't anticipate. There was a talk, over the last several years of, a whole bunch of agencies were going to go bankrupt because of their PERS liability, and then they were going to go to bankruptcy court, and the liability is going to get knocked down by the bankruptcy judge. That hasn't happened. I mean, I worked with Vallejo; they went bankrupt, but that wasn't a fun thing, and it didn't solve all their problems. So I don't think this is one. I know what you're saying, that if you just wait it out and you don't take care of things, someone's going to take care of it for you. My sense is that's not likely to be the case here.
There was talk at some point about establishing a third tier to further mitigate, and I think that talk is current at this point. I've not heard it about that in the past year or so.
Well, and to Carl's point, there was some talk about the state using some of its CARES money to help everybody kind of smooth it out. But I think if you look at the numbers and how do you make it fair that somebody who managed better does not get it, and the ones that are just willy-nilly and doing whatever bad management get some cash, it'd be a very unfair way to do it.
The decisions that this board has made in the past several years, divesting themselves of police and fire, and also the POV, have a very positive impact on our liability going forward. And unfortunately, that was not available. We cap out at about 1.3 million. We're right now about 920. Cap out at about 1.3 million, and then there's a decline from there. So in CalPERS model, that's about the worst case that we can see. About a $1.3 million annual, maybe a little closer to 1.4. And then it starts to slide down. That, because of the steps that you've taken, you start to see that decrease. If you had not taken those steps, what Sarah is saying is correct, we would have seen a significant incline in our obligations.
No, I'm all for addressing this, and I guess we'll be revisiting this for good things. So thank you. Director Sabo. Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. It was jumping out of our fireplace. But I think you helped, and thank you for answering my question. I like Director Miller. I'm in favor of addressing this issue. I don't think there's anything we can ignore or kick a can that we can kick down the road. So we need to as a board, do something with this. I happen to be kind of at a disadvantage here about this particular presentation because I didn't attend the finance committee meeting back in October, and we were, as a board, not given whatever slides or whatever presentation you had in that board meeting lineup. In addition to pension bonds, we talked about Section 115 contributions and the impact of doing certain things with our money. I don't, other than the graphs, where you see where you see the decline in the amount that we have to pay over time. I don't see any impact, or any analysis about all that. And maybe you did that in the October 12th meeting. Do you have slides from that October 12th?
I think they were shared.
Oh, okay. All right. So having said all that, let me make this statement. I'm very reluctant to trust our funds to an organization like CalPERS. And correct me if I'm wrong in this statement, if we issue a bond and give, regardless of how much it is, when we give that payment to CalPERS, we're giving our money for them to invest going forward. They're going to take our money and invest it. And if they come out with a performance of 1.5, regardless of what their targets are, if they come out 1.5, they got a 1.5 return on our money. That $4 million we just put in there. And I'm very reluctant to give it to CalPERS because, as you identified, there are a whole lot of other factors that go into their performance. Consideration of the target rates, politics, and environmental things, and all that. When I guess I kind of favor having us develop a 115 trust, and I don't know what the argument is against having that, but the use of our CARES money, and I don't know the restrictions on it, but I'm wondering why we couldn't use CARES money to fund our ongoing annual expenses to the level of maybe $2 million a year, if that's permissible, and then put our own cash that we have by not spending it on operating expenses, put that into a 115 where we can manage our investment performance versus having CalPERS. I'm convinced that we can do better than 5% with the money in a 115. Do you have anything that you can say that opposes having a 115 Section 115 trust, which gives us discretion to pay down our debt, UAL, or make a contribution, on an annual basis? Is there something opposing that?
No, what I'll say about a Section 115 trust is simply that I know it's certainly a tool that appeals to a lot of the clients we talk to because of the same reluctance that you articulated to put more money into CalPERS and then bear the positive or negative outcome that they may achieve. What a Section 115 trust does not do is it does not take into account when CalPERS sends you they do not take into account any monies in a Section 115 trust for purposes of computing your unfunded liability. So if you have $5 million sitting in a trust, they're going to disregard that for purposes of doing their actuarial calculations and establishing what your required contributions are. Now, to your point, you can use the funds in the trust to make the payments, but it won't reduce your ongoing required UAL payments. The other thing I would just share with you is we looked at this, and I think it's probably in the slide deck that it sounds like this was shared with you, but only yesterday, is that PFM, our PFM Asset Management, which is the asset management part of our company, or was a part of our company until we recently separated legally. But we requested from them in preparation for some discussions about a Section 115 trust back in October, their capital market earnings assumptions in connection with thinking about what you might earn in a Section 115 trust if you had one. And as you probably know, in a Section 115 trust, you get to be in charge of deciding how those funds are invested. And so you can choose an asset allocation that's 50% fixed income, 50% equities. You can choose 70% equities and 30%. You can make those decisions. And what we received, because it's kind of the range that most of our clients look at, is projections of 5-year returns on portfolios ranging from 50-50 equity and fixed income to 70-30 equity, 70-30% fixed income. And the range of projected returns over the next 5 years for those portfolios was 4 to 5.1%. So you absolutely could establish a Section 115 trust. You would, if those projections were anything close to right, you'd still be 3.7% below what PERS would be charging you, but you'd certainly have reduced the ongoing cost of that PERS liability, to a large extent by earning in your own Section 115 trust, a portion of what you're being charged. So it is definitely a strategy that exists. It does certain things and doesn't do others. It avoids certain risks, and you sort of take on some new ones by managing it yourself.
Okay. One other question. I'm losing my voice there. What is PFM's role in any kind of bond issuance? If we decide we want to go to market, what would be the role of PFM? And we described you got two sides, two faces now. I don't know which face I'm talking to, but what would be PFM's role in bond issuance?
So PFM Financial Advisors LLC is the financial advisory part of our business, and that's who my colleague Jaime Trejo, Alec Neal, Brian Galucci, who you've seen before, and I all work for PFM Financial Advisors. If we were engaged by you to assist you in a bond issuance, then we would be your financial advisor, otherwise referred to commonly as a municipal advisor under the Dodd-Frank Act. And we are, under federal law, your fiduciary. So we are registered with the MSRB and the SEC, and we have a fiduciary role for our clients pursuant to federal law. So we're your independent advisor as you go out to the debt capital markets and interface with all the participants in those markets, underwriters, investors, et cetera, to borrow money to do things you may want to or need to do.
And do you receive a fee from us for those services? And are they reflective of how much we borrow or any aspect of the actual issuance? Do you get dragged off the issue?
Well, we do receive compensation for providing those services, and the fees, I think under California law, cannot be tied to the par amount of debt issued, specifically tied, like per bond issued. The fees do tend to range from, some amount to some different amount based on a whole host of factors, including what kind of issuance it is, how complex it is, how long it takes to do it, whether you've done it before or it's a whole new rating agency, presentation process, and it's taking you through that. So there are a variety of ways that fees can be structured. There's no single way they're structured. And sometimes they're paid from the proceeds of bonds at closing if the closing successfully happens, and other times they're not structured that way.
That's for the assistance in issuance. PFM LLC or you?
PFM Financial Advisors LLC. That's us. That's me and my colleagues, and that's who would help you with that process.
Oh, okay.
Our PFM Asset Management would, if you were to set up a Section 115 trust and seek an advisor, an investment advisor to help you with that process, that could be PFM Asset Management or someone else.
Okay.
Director, are you close to wrapping up?
Yeah.
Good.
Sarah, I don't believe that I caught, but I think it's probably good to, even if you said it, reiterate. If we issue bonds, they cannot be used to fund a 115 trust.
That's correct.
That's correct. So just wanted to make sure that was clear.
I understand that, Mike, and that's clear. What I was just to reiterate, what I was getting at was using CARES money to cover our operating expenses to the extent the FAA allows all that, and preserving our cash. Our cash is only 1.5% of what it is. Preserving our cash, and then taking that cash at some point and funding a 115, which would be allowed. We can always take our reserves, our surpluses, and fund a 115. That's kind of where I was going. So it's, instead of using CARES money to pay down the UAL directly, we would use or savings from CARES money to pay our operating expenses. The 115 trust then could pay down the UAL or do whatever we want. Gives us more discretion as to what we want to do, what potential earnings we see. Do you have any opinions about the Fresh Start program that CalPERS has?
Well, they've done fresh starts for your agency before, and Jaime knows more of the details on that. They've done them kind of at their own discretion for you in the past without you seeking a fresh start.
Okay.
And Jaime, if you're still on there and you can remind us what it was that the CalPERS actuary shared with you when you reached out to them on that point.
So they've actually done a fresh start on all your classic programs. They've done a fresh start for your miscellaneous, for your fire and police programs, for the whole programs. And the reason why they did it for the whole plans is because the UAL is made up of bases, and some bases are positive, some are negative. And when you look at the payments every year, in some years you could have a negative payment to CalPERS, which means that CalPERS would give you money back, supposed to be sending that money. So as part of their policy, they don't really do that. So they re-amortize or essentially give you a fresh start for your plan. So if you look at the 2020 UAL report for the miscellaneous, for the fire and police plan, you'll see there's only one basis because there's a fresh start for those plans. And in the miscellaneous plan, there was a negative payment sometime around 2040, 41, 42. So they kind of did a fresh start on the remaining UAL. And that's why you see the UAL going from 2042 to 2062, where you're just paying $3,000 a year. And you'll see that clearly in the slides that have the POB debt service schedules. So your 2-year plans do have a fresh start, and you can make a fresh start, a clean fresh start for your miscellaneous plan. But a fresh start for your miscellaneous plan would kind of be equivalent to plans or scenarios 3A and 3B, where you pay down the UL in a certain amount of period, with the difference being when you make an additional discretionary payment, you have the option of not making that payment that year. Whereas if you initiate a fresh start for the miscellaneous plan, then you're obligated to make those higher payments.
Thank you. And this is questions from Mike. Are we currently prepaying our UAL obligations, getting a discount?
We are yes, we are.
We're
Paying in
doing
cash rather than what we do is we reserve funds throughout the year, and then we make what ostensibly is a lump sum payment, which then reduces some of our obligations. So we do get a little bit of a kick or a little bit of a credit for doing that, 5%, I think it is. So yeah, we do that, and we've been doing that for the last several years, where we set aside funds so that when the year comes, we make a lump sum payment rather than stretching it out over the entirety of the year.
But if we paid our whole UAL obligation at the beginning of the year, would CalPERS give us a discount for that?
And they do. They do. They have.
And we paid us at the beginning of the year.
Correct. Yeah.
But we're accumulating it, paying at the end.
No,
Is that right?
you're saying you accumulated over 1 year.
Yeah, we accumulate through the year to pay.
Oh, okay. It's a balloon thing. Got it. All right. Thank you. I appreciate you answering these questions. And would you leave your card behind if we have additional questions that might be little emails or something?
Of course, yeah. I'm sure you can.
Director Miller, very quickly. 10 years ago, when we were looking at this, we decided to go with a private lender for our pension obligation bond as opposed to a bond. What do you recommend between the two in the current market?
Well, the way we thought about this, if you were to choose to go with a pension obligation bond, our initial look at this was once again on the basis of a private placement. I mean, it's not a hard and fast recommendation at this point. It's not if you were seriously considering going ahead with a pension obligation bond offering, we would have a more fulsome discussion about that. But we assumed it would be a private placement again. And in particular, the size of the potential financing being in any case under $10 million and potentially down to something like $4 million in some of our scenarios. It might not be efficient to go to the public capital markets. And there's already a lender out there who's familiar with you. Again, it's going to really, in part, would be a conversation about what does the picture of the future of the agency look like, and what additional capital needs are you seeking to finance in the future, and how affordable does that all look? And is it easier to have that conversation with one single bank, or to try to put together public disclosure that goes to the whole universe of taxable bond investors, because pension obligation bonds have to be issued on a taxable basis. So again, I would not say that we are making
They do not qualify for tax-free.
They do not, because the ultimate beneficiaries are annuitants. private
We
individuals.
thank you.
Yes, no, it's because the payments ultimately benefit private parties.
When do we have to spend, for Mr. Lapeer, when do we have to spend our CARES money before we can have to give it back?
We have between 2.5 and 3 years left.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but I do have a couple of comments. First of all, other boards in past years, 10 years or other, did not have the benefit of these CARES dollars. We do. And as a member of the lease committee, I was probably the biggest proponent of using about 8 million of that CARES money to purchase a building near some property that we already own. And I was very much in favor of that. And the executive director knows that. I can tell you this, that with all of the facts that you've given us, the different options that you've laid out on the table for us, I am changing my mind on that, and I feel it obviously will continue this discussion amongst ourselves, but I feel it would be a very, very good use of $4 million of that 8 million CARES that we were talking about expanding the property. So we will obviously have more discussion on this. We have no action to take on this today. But again, thank you to you and your colleagues. Excellent job. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure, and appreciate your time and intent focus on a very technical topic. Appreciate it.
So before we move on to our next item, Executive Director, my mistake, I was going to ask you to do this earlier at the front of the meeting and it just slipped my mind. Do we allow, the public has to be here to make comment, correct? That's correct. Be here first. Okay, that's fine. Okay, would you please introduce our new staff member to the board?
Let's do that. Introduce Denise Adams. Denise is with us on we'll call it a trial basis, but I think she's probably going to stick with us. She is our new senior executive assistant. Sorry, yeah. So Denise came to us through Robert Hack Employment Services, and has been with us for about 2 weeks. This is her first enterprise into the boardroom arena, although her experience in previous life was private sector board operations. So she's got experience dealing with board members. And
We're challenging.
So this is Denise.
Welcome.
Denise, I've had the pleasure of welcoming you already, but again, nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on now to.
Who is the secretary of the board? I don't know whether, Amanda, you were the previous secretary, but who's going to handle the board matters?
Ultimately, that will be Denise. Right now, it's a team effort. So Denise learns what Amanda knows, but ultimately Denise will take that role. So Amanda's time will be free up to do the social media programs that we discussed.
Okay, and so if we have questions about travel or conferences or anything, that goes to Denise.
Eventually, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, before we move on to the
So
next.
just throwing that line in, since none of us knew who she was, not sitting here, could someone please send out her email and phone number to us?
Yeah, we will. She currently is working on the receptionist email because she's technically not an employee yet, but when we bring her on, we'll get that.
That would be the nice thing to do. Thank you.
So quickly, before we move on to the next item, I want us to do our very, very best today to be able to adjourn right at 2 o'clock at the very latest, because the staff has a big task ahead of them today. They're creating the military Christmas lounge in this room today at 2 p.m. And if we get beyond that, we're going to have some troubles with it. So I ask the indulgence of the board members to please allow us to move along as quickly as we can. And let's go to item 2, executive. And let's please.
Gary, with that, could you just share what is military law a little bit?
Sure, we've done this in the past. We did not do it last year because of obvious reasons, but it allows our military passengers and their families to have a place of comfort to spend their time while they wait for their flights. And we've got we provide some nice refreshments, and it's very, very comfortable. And it got tremendously great use the last time that we did it. They were very, very appreciative. And I came in a couple of times and it was very, very well received. And we've got a couple of additions to that this year. I believe our restaurant operator is offering incentives to discount.
Not a discount, it's a contribution. If you buy a meal at Moody's or if you just go on Venmo, you can donate to Moody's money so that they can provide the meals for those that would occupy this lounge. So the opportunity for the general public would be to just jump on Venmo. It's at Venmo ad or at Venmo Moody's and contribute. Those funds would be used to pay for the meals that would be provided to our service members.
I really highly recommend to all of our directors that if they have an opportunity, please pop in once this begins and chat with them. They enjoy it. And I think it's really an excellent idea for us to do this. And I'm glad we're reopening it for this Christmas season. Yes.
Chair, I'll just say I've seen it on social media. It's been well received in the community. I've had some questions about it too, and I've already given for the Woody's meals. It's only $10 per meal, so I think it's a discounted rate for a good meal for our military members. So thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Mr. Just have one question on the military
Sure.
thing. That if we send out some kind of announcements to the DOD agencies in the area, their personnel might take advantage of this.
We
Let
have,
them know that we're doing it.
in fact, we have students from DLI that are volunteering to help man the room, if you will. So
Okay.
yeah, we've been in close contact. I'll give great compliments in advance to those on staff that have worked really hard to make this a special occasion and a special occurrence. Chris Morella took the lead on that. Amanda's been actively involved with the repairs, actively involved. We even got to meet Paul. So I think what they've been working on will represent us quite well and will be well received by the military. We have communicated extensively with them to ensure that they're aware.
Good.
And we know that they got about 200 people that are traveling over the holiday season. Around 500 of those travel out.
When does it end?
27? 26.
26th of December. Thank you. All right, Executive Director, you want to set up item 2?
Absolutely. This is resolution number 1809. This is a resolution authorizing and approving a service agreement with Media Systems Group. This has to do with the lovely audio visuals that you guys always enjoy during board meetings and or the lack thereof. If you recall, last month we had some technical problems and one thing as well as we have in the past. We band-aided it together and it's working again. It's well over 10 years old. Chris Morello, I believe, is on, and I'll let Chris give you the final details of what we're proposing to purchase, but it really changes the dynamic of this room.
So, Chris, would you like to take it?
I think it might be near Chris.
Just proving why we need it.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can't. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, very good. Sorry about that. My headset was not working properly. Good morning and happy holidays. As Mike has indicated with the boardroom, the IT that's in there and the projector that's currently in there, one is over 10 years old and is having some reliability issues, but two was never installed with the intent of the platforms we're using today, this audio visual back and forth communication. So it is strictly a projector that shows, and then we band-aided through COVID the ability to have Zoom meetings by having another computer and a separate camera. So this installation would actually be installing a camera and a video screen in behind where the pull down screen is currently, and a panel to be able to monitor and connect all of the pieces together. So it would provide us a better solution for the long term of doing audiovisual meetings into the future. We researched companies in the area. Media Systems Group is well known. They've installed for many agencies across, whether it's cities, counties, TMC, and MST. They've done primarily all the installations for video equipment in many of our partner cities and communities around. And they submitted this proposal for us to upgrade our equipment. So with that, we'll answer any questions, but I will ask that you adopt resolution 1809 so that we can start this process.
Start with Director Saber.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Chris. Did we solicit or did we get any competing bids on this thing? Are these the lowest cost guys?
We did research using Alvarez technology to find the companies that would be able to do this installation for us, because they know our technology structure, and they recommended that we work with Media Systems Group.
Are we, Scott, are we obligated as a district to have competing bids?
So with something like this, the short answer is no.
Okay.
When you have something like this, this is a technical installation where you can go out and get competing bids, and you're not going to have any of the parts that will be the same. None of the components will be the same from manufacturers. If you had a specific list, we demand this screen and these connectors and these components, then you might be obligated to go out and get some bids. But in this, what you're looking for is a solution, and that solution is variable depending on the expertise of the individuals. This really falls more under a professional service than it does a simple purchase, because what you're getting is their professional expertise to install the finished product that you need.
Okay. And Chris, quickly, what are the technology upgrades that we're really getting on this equipment and this installation? Can you encapsulate it through 4 items?
Primarily, it will be a 98-inch screen that will mimic the size of the PowerPoint presentation that you saw today. That will be installed behind where that pull-down screen is currently. It will be a fixed camera in the room that will be hardwired and installed, rather than the camera that's just connected in front of you to that computer. And then it will be the data connections and a panel for us to control the input and output of presentations and the camera itself. So those are like primary components that will be included.
Okay. Finally, just out of curiosity, when all of this existing goes away, what happens to all that? does it get sold as surplus or just a media solution? Do they keep it?
So we don't intend on it going away.
Oh, it's not going away?
No, we've got it band-aided. It will be made available on occasional use when another group uses this facility or this room. We don't intend on making the new system available to people who rent the room for this system active for them. Because of the band-aid work that we've done, we think that it will continue to operate. This is an improvement in reliability. It's an improvement along several levels.
Okay, answered my question. Thanks, Chris.
Any other questions from board members? I know the finance committee has seen this, and I believe the finance committee is in favor.
That is.
Dr. Miller?
We talked before about soundproofing the room, and when we've been in closed session, I've had occasion to leave the room and come back. I know when I'm in the lobby, I can feel what's being talked about.
That's not in this proposal at all. Seems as though the worst part of the sound leakage, if you will, comes from the doors.
Right.
And we have to replace those, but that's not in this proposal.
Something we should consider. And also, I think whenever we have anybody standing here at the podium, it's the likelihood of this sound escaping is a lot greater. Just been my observation.
Yeah, I know there's been discussion previously about that. There's been attempts to resolve that issue. It's a difficult one without replacing the doors first.
And as far as that camera goes, can't you use that in presentations where you have to go somewhere? I'm just kidding.
It's heavier than a suitcase, than my suitcase. I did with the noise, or the noise that Carol brought up. Is a sound machine possible in the lobby?
We tried that.
Okay, didn't work. Okay.
We tried white noise.
Okay.
In the past.
And I do know that this space, and we did discuss that at the finance committee, is available for use as well, so it's just something good to know. And I think maybe we want to look at that. Defining that more. As one more company.
So I have one question for Chris. Chris, if this is approved, what's the timeline for installation?
Really, Mr. Chair, that's really contingent upon supply chain.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, we think that they'll be fairly available, but we don't know until we place the order.
Yeah, that's pretty much standard with every item that has to arrive somewhere other than next door. So with that, I would ask for a motion to approve resolution 1804.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Amanda, roll call vote.
Director Sonny,
Yes.
Director Level,
Yes.
Director Sabo,
Yes.
Director Miller,
Yes.
Chair Curcio.
Yes, thank you. Motion passes 5-0. Move on to item 3, and again, Executive Director.
Resolution 1810, which is a resolution authorizing and approving a service agreement with William A. Thayer Construction Incorporated. This is regarding the property that we own, the building that we own at 2801 Monterey Salinas Highway. And it's building A, the large building that's currently occupied by Benjamin Keller. When we purchased the property, we knew that there were some issues that needed to be addressed. That was disclosed in the review of the property itself. One of those has come. One of the issues that we'll need to address with that building is the decks. There's a deck, particularly the large deck, that has been infected with dry rot and dry rot termites. It's in need of replacement. It's not just a simple deck. It is cantilevered into the building, so you're not just dealing with deck replacement, you're dealing with portions of the building exterior as well. Chris will walk you through the specifics of the program, but this is something that we need to do to restore that building or restore that portion of the building to useful condition. Currently, the decks are all closed off because they're not safe. Chris, you want to cover the specifics?
Absolutely, thank you. So as Executive Director indicated, when we purchased the property in the inspection reports, it was noted that there could be some damage to the decks. As we have now, it's about a year and a half into owning the property, we are taking a deeper dive into the property itself and starting to look at what repairs are necessary to this building. The deck is the first, and we did, so dry wood termites were found, and we have already done that fumigation. That happened over the Thanksgiving break. We communicated extensively with the tenants there, and we were able to get that done on Wednesday through Saturday of the Thanksgiving week. So that portion has been completed. So now we really need to go in, as well as the decks. All the tenants know they're not to be used, and they're signed as such. We have provided them with signage that the decks cannot be used currently because of safety concerns. So the next step was to evaluate what we needed to do to repair it. So we've worked with our airport engineer, Frank Lee, to come up with a plan for mitigating the safety concerns that exist. We believe that where the deck structures kind of come together, so there are areas where they connect, are the areas where water would pond, typically even in your house on the corners and things like that, are the biggest areas of concern. But we also need to bring the railing up to code because this building was built quite a long, about 30 plus years ago. And it hasn't been updated since then. So we will need to do some code compliance as well. We will need to pull a building permit from the city of Monterey because this property does sit within their limits. So those are some of the concerns and things that we put together. The airport annually, and we're doing it actually right now, we subscribe to, or under our rules and regulations, the Uniform Construction Code Act, which has us annually going out and asking for a list of interested parties to provide us services if necessary. So that's what we use whenever we have projects, internal projects like this that need to be brought forth. So we use that list for anyone that had done work or asked to be added to our list to do this type of construction. We sent it out, but we had very specific timelines. We want, and as we talked about before, procurement is an issue, but also getting contractors, they were all very busy. So we were very specific that we wanted this work done pretty quickly. We want it done in this winter, spring. So we sent it out a notice and asked if anyone was available and interested in providing us a quote to do this work. William Thayer Construction replied. They've done work for us in the past. They actually did a repair for us at the Golden Tea Restaurant when we had to do that big floor repair quite a few years ago. We know that they're very good at working with tenants and with tenants that still need to be in the building. So they submitted this proposal for us. It was found to be reasonable based on today's current costs for procurement by Frank Lee and by our maintenance manager. So with that, we recommend that we move forward with this repair in a not to exceed with William Thayer Construction. We will come back to you when we do a budget amendment and add this to our capital improvement program. It is not a project that is currently on there, but we believe the timing is critical because we know that this repair needs to be done. So I will answer any other questions you might have.
No, I'm in support of this. The finance committee did review it as well. Certainly knew there were some needs for the building when we acquired it. Certainly it's important to do this. In favor.
Director Miller?
If we're gonna have to draw some plans, is that part of this contract, or is that, will that go to somebody else?
Draw some plans.
You're gonna have to submit plans to the city on what you're planning to do, how you're gonna fix this.
The city will be involved because currently sits in their jurisdiction.
But you need a draftsman or an architect to draw plans to submit to the city. Is that part of this proposal?
Oh, yes, yeah, I'm with you. Yes, it is.
Oh, thank you. Director Lovell?
No, I think this is, does come under the heading of emergency repairs, and it's a safety issue, the liability issue, so I believe sooner rather than later is good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to say, I know that Thayer worked here, when I first came on the board, he was finishing up a lot of that work down there at the restaurant level, and to my knowledge, we've never had an issue with anything that has been done here that this company has done.
Thank you. Mr. Sable.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little fuzzy on what was known at the time we purchased this property. I know we used FAA funds to do that, but didn't we get a termite inspection? At that point, did they not identify this dry rot and these dry rot termites?
The inspection report identified some problems with the deck. They did not specify termite related damage. Termite related damage is, I guess you could call it a newer entrant to the discussion, but it did identify that the decks were in poor condition and needed to be replaced.
Did we have a termite inspection, to see whether or not there were termites in the building?
Yes.
And they declared it termite free?
Yes. No, I do not recall any discussion about termites in that inspection.
We had recourse on them. In fact, there are termites with substantial damage.
You can tell us when the termites actually showed up in the table there prior, perhaps, but we don't know when they. We learned of termite concerns as part of the evaluation of the deck. The deck was visibly in trouble, and during the inspection, we learned that there were termites.
Were there any other bids for performing this work? I was pleased to see that we have a local firm doing this, but were there other competing bids? And I think
as Chris indicated, Director, annually we solicit for interested companies through the Uniform Purchasing Act to do work such as this. So we use that list. We solicited from the companies that were qualified off of that list. The only response we got was from there.
okay. All right. Thank you.
So I just have one question. Can this be paid for with CARES money?
I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to look at that. So we need a reimbursement anyway. So we'll make that part of the discussion as we look at the board, as we look at the budget. And then
Okay, thanks. All right. With that, I would call for a motion to approve resolution 1810.
So,
Second? Second. Discussion? Amanda, roll call vote?
Director Sani,
Yes.
Director Lovell,
yes,
Director Sabo,
Yes.
Director Miller.
Yes.
Chair Crucio.
Yes. Motion passes by vote. Thank you. Okay, Executive Director, item 4, please.
Resolution 1811, contract extension with LSL CPAs and CPAs and advisors. This is an extension of that on through your third year of audits with LSL contract allows for an extension for an additional 2 years. Performance has been satisfactory to the board, certainly has been to staff. So we're recommending that you extend their contract for an additional 2 years for fiscal year 2022 and 2023. The transfer extension, the fees would be $41,164 for the first year of the extension and $41,987 for the second year of the extension. Because the partners have to rotate every 5 years, we'll still have the pleasure of having the same partner as the head of the other. So for consistency, for continuity, and the fact that we received a very good audit, a thorough audit from LSL, it's our recommendation that you authorize us to move forward with the extension.
So I'd like to hear from the finance committee first on this. Dr. Lopez?
I think that we have found LSL to be very thorough, very professional. I think that they have been responsive to any requests that either staff or that the board has come up with. And Brandon is a really good representative of that firm. He explains things carefully, and again, I'm using the word thorough because that's what you want with an audit. And they have been very good. They've also been extremely good to be very proactive with the changes in gas fee, so that they work with staff, and we actually came in a year earlier than we were required to. For instance, on 2 of the gas fee changes because of the lead that our auditors took. So I fully recommend this, and we talked about it at length at finance. Lisa can add something, but I believe that finance was 100% nice.
Director Sonny?
I think, Marianne, or Director Leffel, you did a good job of just articulating what we talked about for the most part. I think staff has also enjoyed working with them. We see continuity as a good thing for the board as well as everyone on the team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Sabo?
Yeah, I support the retention of LSL. Does this have the support of the finance director, Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Little?
Yeah, I've been impressed with them. Seem to understand us and do a good job, so, yeah, hopefully.
Very good. I would ask for a motion to approve resolution 1811.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Amanda, roll call vote.
Director Sonny,
Yes.
Director Leffel,
Yes.
Director Sabo,
Yes. Yes.
Director Miller,
Yes.
Chair Christian.
Yes. Thank you. Let's take 10. Welcome back. Let's go on to H, board committee reports and acceptance of department reports. Again, I would like to remind my fellow board members to hold department reports that are involving the standing committees, meaning budget, finance, air service, and air property. If you have other questions about the department reports, you can ask them at this time. And we will start with Director Sonny. Anything? Director Miller?
None.
Director Leffel?
I did not have anything.
Director Sabo?
Yeah, there is no finance committee report, and so did we do any CARES Act billing?
So we're gonna cover that in finance.
Okay,
Okay?
then that's,
We have something that's not on one of the standing committees.
okay, I thought that was part of the normal committee report, but.
I know you've been struggling with this. but
I know.
It helps us move it along. Okay, with that said, we're gonna go to standing committees and we're gonna start with budget and finance. Director Sonny, you wanna take it?
We reviewed most of the things on the agenda today.
Okay, well, that's good.
And so I think we reported out, or, you asked questions as a board for those things. In addition, we did go over just our monthly financials, and everything, is doing well overall. I don't recall anything. I think the LSL contract, we spent some time on that. Continuing with our auditors for another year, but again, that was brought before the board.
Director Level, anything there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the months have been surprisingly strong and good, carried particularly by parking. And we've just been very fortunate, and with the backfill with the CARES Act, and the finances are really, they're in good shape. So I think, staff has managed to keep expenses down, and we had a very pleasant meeting, and as Lisa said, most of the things that were on our agenda were resolutions that we passed and spoken about earlier today. So that was it. CARES Act, Bill.
It is in the packet.
It's in your packet.
The whole financial.
It's in your packet.
Okay, well, I usually, Tim has put it into the narrative, and you didn't have contributions. The narratives come out, yeah.
The graphs are in the packet.
So Bill, did you have any questions?
Yeah, without having the rifle through all this, did we make a CARES contribution in the current version?
Did we, a CARES contribution or a CARES withdrawal? So we got a reimbursement for CARES.
Well,
yes.
Reimbursed, I
We
guess.
reimbursed ourselves with CARES, yes.
Okay, we submitted a billing, in the current period. That's about what I was getting at. The second thing is what is our policy regarding submitting capital project items for CARES funding versus eating it out of district cash? And I guess you were going to follow up on all that on our previous project that we approved today. What is our policy?
Now that we are more comfortable that our recovery will stay in place, and we are gaining a great deal of confidence there, we'll have the ability to draw down on some of the CARES Act funding that we have been reserving as more of a rainy day fund in the event that the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic on the financials continue. They're not continuing, so we don't have the ability to draw on some of those CARES Act dollars to do exactly what you said.
Are there restrictions from the FAA on capital spending CARES money on capital projects?
There is there are 3 tranches of money. Each one has a different restriction associated with it. You can, the most flexible is the original bill, CARES Act bill, where we currently have, as I indicated earlier, about $8.3 million.
All right. So we're, to the extent possible, is the policy that when feasible, when possible, and legal, are we going to spend this CARES money on capital projects?
We're going to start reimbursing ourselves for expenses associated with either capital projects or operations.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Director Sable, why don't you give us an air service and marketing report?
Well, pretty much everything there is to know about it is in the air services report. And I guess we're going to be sponsoring, doing first sponsoring of a soccer team, which is in the area. That's up to you.
No, I must confess that my air service notes are on my computer in my office, so. If, Director, if you think we have, Executive Director, anything that you'd like us to mention?
I'll amplify a little bit what Director Sabo said. We are in the final stages of negotiating a sponsorship agreement with Monterey FC, the football club called Union. We will have a presence in their stadium. We're also working closely with Big Sur International Marathon. We have the remainder of the sponsorship that we paid for in 2019 that we have activated will be full sponsor for the full marathon this coming year. I think that covers most everything. You'll see the only other thing that I think the representative wanted to mention was you'll see some point reductions in December and January. So we started United's down to 3 flights a day, one each to each of their hubs, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver. San Diego's pulled back to 5 days a week instead of 7, just for the near term. There is a reduced frequency to Phoenix during this period as well. But these are the normal and usual pullbacks. We typically see the airlines pull back during the December and January. We had a phenomenal Thanksgiving. We're going to have a really good Christmas, but we're going to be limited by capacity.
So I do have one thing I wanted to bring up because it's, I thought, really good news. It is the shortest noise report we have ever witnessed. 1/2 of 1 page.
4 as opposed to 20 last year.
And I believe Director Sable was impressed with this because he got less telephone calls at his house beating him up. So that's good news.
It is very good news.
Any questions on your service?
Yeah, I have a few.
Okay.
Well, questions, more comments. I mean, I think it really sums it up here. The airlines have increased flights by 248. So we're up to 646 compared to 398 to this same period last year. That's up 62%. The number of available seats have increased 65% to 46,480 versus 28,124. Great news. And Mike and Tim, or whoever is responsible for adding the 4th year to the employment chart. I don't know about the rest of the directors, but I really appreciate that. It gives you more of a perspective, especially with 20 being such a terrible year.
We could take that one off.
Yeah, that's the one we need to get rid of. But just seeing the December number, 21,768, almost, well, certainly our highest October in 4 years, and it's almost just a few claimants away from being our all-time highest number. So great news, all those areas. What about the DFW flight? We're supposed to be adding a 3rd, or we lost a 3rd? What happened?
No, we don't have a 3rd on the horizon right now.
Okay.
There is the possibility of some movement there in the spring, but nothing's confirmed.
And XJS or whatever those JSX. Well, I have the right. They're just a different order. It's like
It's an anagram.
What's happening there?
They're doing quite well. Met with them about 2 weeks ago now. They're very pleased. Interestingly, their comment was most of the traffic is from the LA Basin area here, not as much so local traffic going there. So
I know they're not commercial in the sense they're flying out of our terminal, but it'd be kind of interesting to maybe in the operation reports that can be included in there. Because people ask how successful it is. I try to urge people to fly it so we have it. Okay, no, it's a great report.
I'll do my best Toyota for you.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. It was a good report.
Yes, Mr. Son.
With the good news, since we're in the holidays, I just want to thank the police department too in our report. They helped a runaway juvenile get home to Texas and dumped a car battery, and also helped, it sounded like a stranded passenger. So some good news, and it's nice to see them helping the community in different ways.
And a nice comment in the comment section as well. But well,
We would have said they thank Gary.
yeah, Jerry.
I didn't even know I was.
Another role in the job.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
So everyone jump the shark there a little bit on the Air Services Committee report. Could you give your comments you gave us in the committee about these customer comments about the water and water not being available?
Yeah.
What's a filter?
Water pumps
No.
water pumps have been turned off since pandemic started. We have no public facility that I'm aware of has turned that back on. So the filter light is a non sequitur. We think it is simply a resident in the terminal building.
Well, in the past, we thought maybe it was TSA employee
I
that
was
was
trying not to say that, but you're correct.
Very good. Why don't you take these?
Well, I too forgot my notes. We did that as a Zoom meeting, but my recollection is most of what we talked about is stuff on the horizon, negotiations that's not, it shouldn't be talked about in open session.
I think the only point that you may recall that we should report out is that Sky Park self-storage is for sale. Partners that developed that and have only been operating it for years. One of them passed away in July. The second is ready to retire, so he's put it on the market. So you'll see that transaction, assuming that they find a willing seller, and I know they will because we've been contacted by several. You'll probably be asked to transfer a lease at some point in the not too distant future.
And we do have some extra land around there, and this is the storage area closest to the jet center, right in between the jet center and Delmonte Aviation.
That's correct. It's the same development that about 3 years ago handed you back about 1.25 acres of property that they had tied up in the lease. They said they didn't want to expand their operation, so they gave you that property back. It's still available. Should the new owner decide that they want to expand operations, we can certainly have those discussions.
And just a follow-up question for the lease or the new loan for the north side storage that went through without any problems that we voted on last time.
We are not aware of any issues in that at all.
I think you have heard about it.
I think so, yeah.
Any questions? Please? Yes.
And then this kind of reverts back to the November 10th, I guess it's November 10th, lease report. There was some discussion about the GA hangar analysis, and I was wondering when the board will see the results of that hangar analysis, and the building analysis, and also when will the board see the DMA evaluation report? And I understand some of it may be closed session, but some of it we were about to take a step, or we want to take a step regarding the general aviation property or area over there. And I'm wondering when that's going to come to the board through the lease committee, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
We're hopeful that that will be in the January, February timeframe. There's some negotiations with DMA that are ongoing that you'd like to complete, so you have a full picture of what your options are. So hopefully we can get that done in January, February timeframe.
Are we negotiating with them already, or are we just receiving options from them? Or are we just receiving information?
We are negotiating on the terms of what a separation agreement would be, or a buyout for that property, for the property that they currently lease from us for the south side GA hands.
This is one of the things we talked about, that we said probably isn't best to be discussed in open session, but closed session. Best discussed in closed session, not in.
Okay, and anything that's proprietary to, I get that, all that. I'm just wondering when, that's a big consequential decision for the board to make. And I'm wondering when, if it's gonna come to the lease committee, which is that's a public meeting, or is it gonna come in closed session in the future? You said February.
As you are aware, committees do not make decisions, committees only make recommendations. So anything we do in that regard has to come to the full board. So it will start with lease committee, it will come to the full board.
So the lease committee hopes to have that January, February close. Okay, nothing on local jurisdiction, I don't believe. Director Lovell, I know this is your favorite topic right now. Tell us what you can, and I know you can't tell us everything.
On December 6th, LAFCO did meet, and the vote was a 5 to not accept the staff recommendation. 2 voted to accept it. And we will come back, we'll see on January the 5th, we have a special meeting calendar to take a look at the resolution that staff has developed along with the recommendations of the 5 vote. We'll see what that is and if that's something that we are accepting. So
Basically, it's statement.
yeah, there's a lot of negotiation going on. It's probably a good hour a day in negotiations right now with different people, so we'll see how it goes up.
Very good. Regional taxi, we don't have a meeting. Dr. Sago, anything at TAMC?
There wasn't too much at TMC. They met on the first of the month, was their normal fourth Wednesday of the month, first of the month. The board authorized the staff to release the draft of the regional transportation plan for public review. Of consequence of the airport is that plans for rather large expenditure over the years for Highway 68, the modification of Highway 68 right outside the airport here, environmental work, and then planning and design work. So that money is being allocated in their plan. So that's how for public review. I think we want to stay very close to that. Plan that affects the airport live. And they added Debbie Hale is now gone, and Scott, Mr. Buckley is now taken over as director. So I noticed a shift that they have here now. They're putting more items on the in front of the executive committee and then shoving it to the consent agenda. The full board doesn't seem to be approving much of anything anymore, but that's the way they are keeping the hand up. The biggest thing for the airport is Monterey, that was 68 out there.
Bill, does that include the roundabout?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess that's a personal decision on our part. Quite frankly, from my perspective, what I've heard, even among the directors on Tennessee, is folks are a little skeptical about whether all those ground plants are going to benefit anybody. It actually slows down the traffic. Through flow, it slows it down rather than speeds it up. But see, and it's the current federal way to build a new highway.
So it's a quick question.
Yeah.
I've heard from other folks that attend council meetings, not board members, general public, et cetera, that it's probably before a shovel goes into the ground on those roundabouts, it's 2 to 3 years away. Is that what you're hearing?
Oh, absolutely.
At least.
Yeah. The design work is not going to be completed in another 4 years.
Yeah, okay, that's
Okay. And by the way, I forgot to mention Castro, Highway 156 at Castroville interchange got stiff money. State transportation improvement plan money that was in the plan to be submitted out to the public. So that whole 156 thing, at least as far as the Castroville interchange, is moving forward. It has funding recommendation.
good to know. Thank you. Mr. Miller, anything on special districts?
We have a meeting coming up on January the, what was it, 20th? Who's the guest speaker going to be?
I believe it will be Senator Laird. I have to confirm that.
But should be a good meeting to kick off the new year. It would be the 18th. You're correct. January 18th. So look for an email coming up there. As far as legislation, Director Les will usually talk about that.
There really hasn't been anything. They've been pretty quiet on anything that would affect us or any of the districts. So there's nothing. The only thing they've, I think still everybody now that was eligible has applied. There's that financing, and that was what CSBA really spent a lot of time on last year. We obviously were not because we got our funding. But to a lot of the districts, it really made a big. So there hasn't been anything that's just really important.
Executive Director, MPAD?
We had a special meeting a week ago today on Wednesday evening. It was the completion of the public hearing on the regional housing needs analysis. The state had returned their comments on the methodology that was used. The methodology was changed to reflect what the state had suggested. During the comment period after, some board members decided to put forward a recommendation for changes to the methodology that were not fully analyzed. So the issue was remanded back to staff to do analysis on the suggested changes. Overall, the changes, either the ones the state is proposing that we use or the ones that are proposed by the board, change the outcome regarding housing and the economic evaluation of that housing. There are categories associated with the housing and with what kind of housing is built, and the state skewed more toward the affordable housing component and wanted more movement in that direction. That was what was previously proposed. The proposal that came from the board level was even more skewed toward affordable housing for at-risk, the at-risk community. So you'll see a significant amount of discussion once the methodology has been approved. We'll start to see some discussion with the communities about how they will meet that need. And what that need is. So stay tuned. The actual analysis is right now scheduled to go back to the state for adoption in probably June. So between now and June, there's not fun. But it certainly is something to keep your eyes on because it changes the housing demand. It changes the housing requirement for the region. Fairly significant.
Questions on MPAD?
No.
How often do you meet?
Once a month. Typically, they take December off, not this year. I'm sorry.
How long do their meetings go?
We've been as short as 30 minutes and as long as the one last Wednesday was 4.5 hours.
Well, we got them beat.
Sometimes.
Most of the time.
Thanks for coming up, maybe you overtime.
Are those meetings on YouTube or where can you view them?
They're on their website. Yeah.
Okay, I have been informed by District Council that he's been checking his emails to see if there's been any news coming in. We're hoping on our city lawsuit, and nothing has come in. And he further tells me that we have no reason to hold a closed session today. So we are going to go to item L, which is discussion of future agendas. And I know that Director Sani has something, and maybe others as well. But Director, why don't we start with you?
Too many notes here today. Thank you. I have a request to have the quarterly goals review added to next agenda. If there are any, it was something that we had discussed, I believe, in August as a board, and just want to make sure that we do that quarterly this year and have it on our agendas.
Chairman, the request in August and part of my goals was to provide a written update on the goals. I'm very happy to do that. That's in compliance with the goals that the board set. I'm happy.
Well, we have a director that is making a request here, and I would ask for a second to add that to the agenda next time around.
Second.
We have a second, so it will be on the agenda.
You're looking for something more than written response?
I thought we had talked about having that, having the board have discussions, and I guess maybe
Are you looking for this to be a closed session?
yes, I believe so.
So I think that has to be,
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that if we're going to do that, it's in a public session.
I don't know why we would have an objection to doing it in open session.
You know, I'm just curious, you know, the goals said written. I'm happy to provide them.
I just got the goals from the attorney yesterday. I believe I've not had a lot of time to assimilate it. So, but Scott, you and I had conversation. Is the reason I had originally kind of wanted to have both, but I don't know what if you have any guidance at this point.
Well, you've got a motion to second to put on the agenda. It did the following the discussion of the goals, it was required to provide a monthly written quarterly. I'm sorry. Well, there's the update on goals is quarterly, but there's a monthly written update on other items as well. But if it's the pleasure of the board that you want to put this on the agenda, we can have a discussion.
Well, I guess I don't believe we've seen a written quarterly at this point, and that would be helpful. So we certainly do
Happy
that.
to do that.
And,
We didn't pass on the contract until I believe the September meeting, so we're still within that quarter.
okay.
Happy to do that.
That would be great. And I think just formalizing the goals too, even what I did see, and Scott, you and I haven't had a chance to talk about it, but I'd like to see that, you know, defined a little bit more. I know that they've done reviews. And again, this to me is, I guess I have my HR hat on at this point. Just I thought there had been discussion at the board for this, that we would do it quarterly. So if it's, you know, a matter of, you know, let's see. I think it would be great to get it documented quarterly.
So if we have a motion and we have a second. That's all it takes to put it on the agenda. What I would like to get clarified is, does the motion maker have any objection for us doing this in open session?
No, I do not.
Okay.
And I concur with the second.
Yeah, it's done.
Well, I've got it seconded, so I concur with
Okay. That's all we have. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Go to the order.
I'm not sure the timing, but within the next 60 days, I would like to see a special session dedicated to our CalPERS funding issues, and where we have a committee of the whole where we can discuss the various options and how we're going to proceed forward. That can be part of a strategic planning session, or it can be a standalone item. But I think it's important that we have an open session among all of us. It's the proper way to proceed and get the best advice from our staff, as well as if we deem it necessary to get the consultants in on it. But within the next 60 days, have something in front of us where we start to move forward on the decision for funding the CalPERS UAL.
So I thought the plan moving forward with the discussion that we began today, and I'd ask the finance committee to help on this. I believe, didn't we say that we are going to have a discussion and bring it back either in January or February?
That is correct, because at that time, we should have a better determination of FAA's intent with our terminal and with our strategic plan and everything else. So it'll be incorporated into the strategic planning. And I was going to ask, did we set a date for that in January?
Tentatively, it was the 26th and 27th of January. We have been contemplating, to ask you for your advice here. We have been planning 2 days in a row. It's a very data-rich discussion, and that may be a little much to do 2 days in a row. If you like a little breathing room, separate that a little. Maybe a session on the 26th and a session the week following rather than back to back.
So SWAT E is still on the 26th. It goes partly that morning. So I don't know that we would want to do anything in case there's something that any of us want to attend at the conference.
Okay.
So I think we need to go 27, 28.
Yeah, I actually agree
I'll
with that.
speak for myself. I pretty much like that week out because I thought we had a conference the first part of the week and then we did strategic planning. I believe that since sometimes it's easy to forget from one point to the next of what we talked about, so that we don't have to, you all don't have to listen to me try to recap something. I would prefer to have 2 days in a row and just go through it while we got it. That way, if we've got any consultants that need to be here, they're here. We might be bringing back and forth. I would much prefer to do it. Just get it done.
I agree. Okay. As well. The directors agree back to back is working.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I like.
Can we push it into?
I have a request on. I'm not sure well, I must have been asleep, but did we, where's this discussion about when we're having the strategic planning meeting? When did that get decided?
We talked about it last month or the month before about the end of January. And about
Okay,
going into that week.
So it's
always
solidified as to a strategic planning meeting. And my request for discussion of UAR funding
That's
can be a part of that.
Actually, that's the way we talked about it the last time we had this
Okay,
discussion.
I might have been session when I left early, okay? And yes, I had my hearing aids, but,
Not today. You don't have.
So write down 27, 28. Those are our strategic plans.
okay.
All right, is that, Lisa, did you have something?
Yeah, I did, and I think it kind of is what we're doing right now, is just our January plans, and I didn't have a strategic session in my calendar. I knew we had the conference, end of January as well. So is that, are we calling that a strategic planning session? Is that 2 days or what? What should I put that in my calendar as?
It will be, you could fly it under the heading of strategic planning. It is really the analysis of the finance, the program of finance for the safety enhancement program, which is the terminal building and all of the associated enabling projects.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I think there's some other things strategically that we should be looking at too, so maybe we
That's
can-
not
and you
what
and I
those
can
meetings
take-
are intended for.
So it's just financials.
Correct.
Okay, and is there any way to get the information? It will need the whole month before it will be collected? Or is it possible to get something in the middle of January, just for us to chew on? Think about? I don't know, I'm just trying to understand the timeline, if there's any, if everything will just come at the end of the month.
You'll have the information in advance to review.
Yeah, but just 3 days, right? I mean, the end of January is pretty tough for me at this point, I believe, but I will do my best. Okay. Sounds good.
Mr. Chairman, I'm confused. The strategic planning session on May 27th and 28th is not really strategic planning, it's a financial assessment. And I guess, does it include the UAL as well as our funding for the safety?
It does include it will include the UAL discussion in as much as if you decide to move forward with the overall program, there is debt associated with that. So we wrap the discussion about UAL and any debt that the board would like to take on from UAL into that discussion. That was part of the presentation. If you decide not to move forward with the master plan, then with the safety enhancement program, then it's a totally different discussion at that point.
Okay, and at that point, are we deciding, I'm trying to make sure I understand the agenda for that meeting. If we decide, are we going to be asked to decide whether to move forward with the safety system, safety plan, master plan?
Yeah.
Are we going to be asked to move forward with that with us? Or are we going to be going forward with the bonding? Is this an either or that goes on here? Because
No, not necessarily, but for us to continue to move forward, we need this board to say yes to move forward with the balance of the safety enhancement program. You've already said yes to the general aviation development, that's done. The next step, and we're in design on it now, is the ramp for the terminal building and the new aircraft rescue and firefighting station. We need to begin that process where you say yes to the overall program so we can move forward with discussions, finalizing discussions with FAA about funding, developing the final plan of finance, and doing all of the things that you need to do in advance of the balance of the projects. We just need a yes so that we can do that.
So
We
yes,
have not shared with.
we're talking about dollar signs.
That is a large part of what you will see is dollar signs associated with how we would pay for the safety enhancement program.
And sources of funding are open at that point. Okay.
They will be to the best of our ability as finite as they can be. And as detailed as they can be.
Okay.
We owe you that so that you can make an informed decision about moving forward.
My primary interest is that's a good one. I have interest in that. I also have interest in discussing our alternatives regarding that unfunded liability.
I think
And so I guess if one of that's on the agenda,
I think the first discussion and UAL will be part of the discussion about debt. If the board chooses to go forward, then the strategy for UAL may be one thing. If it chooses not to go forward with the capital, with the safety enhancement program and the debt associated with that, the discussions about UAL may be totally different.
To simplify it, in January, what we're gonna really look at is what is more important. Well, they're both important, but to control the cash flow and know what our cash flow is going forward, or to have a bunch of cash on hand. Those are gonna be our two major decisions. And then we've got different categories on how we'll get there. Those, based on all of our other needs, it's gonna be, do we manage our cash flow down, or do we let it be higher? Do we keep more cash on? So those are our two.
That's
Good.
yeah, I think I understand clearly. I just, my concern here is that I don't want in that session to be limited on the agenda or the discussion to saying, yes, go forward with the master plan, but okay, now we're going to talk about bonds, because I don't agree with necessarily with the bonding solution. I think there ought to be a discussion about the other alternatives other than issuing a POV. And that's what I want to have happen in that meeting, an open discussion among the board members on alternative funding of the UAL.
I think that's what we have.
Is that what your understanding is? Okay. I'm fine.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.